I'm here.
The industry faces a massive
something in
uptick.
the chat.
Sorry about that. The industry faces a massive uptick in projects offshore. But in order to realize the growth, we need a sufficient fleet of installation vessels. And unfortunately, that is not the case. Analysts expect a shortage of installation vessels as early as 2025. With us is Alexander Fløtre, VP Offshore Wind at Rystad Energy, to tell us more. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. No problem at all. As I mentioned, my name is Alexander Fløtre. I'm a vice president and product manager at Rystad Energy for Offshore Wind. So I head up our offshore wind research department. And I think we can jump to the next slide because I want to just focus on three main points in this presentation. Talking a little bit about the backdrop of the forecast for the installation vessels for offshore wind that we see. Talking about the market drivers, not just in terms of capacity deployment, but also the key trends in terms of the components that go into this market. Then we'll speak directly to the demand for the installation vessels and look at that potential bottleneck for the industry that we see from 2025 onwards. Before talking a little bit to the supply side, how have they reacted? What are we seeing of the key trends on the supply side, etc. So next slide, please. Before kind of jumping into that, I just wanted to present Rystad Energy a little bit. As with a growing share of the companies within the offshore wind industry, we also have a legacy in the oil and gas business. But over the last couple of years, we've been really diving into the renewable space, and we now cover over 80,000 solar, wind, and storage assets. So that's kind of what our research is based upon. We do all our analyses based on a bottom-up project-by-project analysis. Next slide, please. So just taking a little bit of a status quo of the offshore wind market. At the end of the last year, we saw the market reaching 31.9 gigawatts of capacity. Around 80% of that has come from Europe, being the most mature region, if anything can be kind of seen as the most as mature in this industry. The UK, after 2020 was passed, is still the main nation in terms of offshore wind capacity, followed by Germany, but just slightly now ahead of China. As we see, China has been ramping up very substantially over the last couple of years, and we've seen, from a very small base from 2010, an annual growth rate of 26%. Next slide, please. So, the growth rate on the global scale is expected to continue going forward and towards 2025 and actually accelerate a little bit with an annual growth rate of 28%. So from that 31.9 gigawatts that we saw in the end of 2020, we expect that to reach 109 gigawatts by 2025. And that is more than a tripling of the current installed capacity. As you see, in the short to medium term, the global offshore wind market is going to be driven very, very much by China, as they have feed-in tariffs that are being partially phased out post-2021, and they had a construction backlog of 10 gigawatts plus going into 2020. So these developers are really rushing to reach that full feed-in tariff window. For Europe, it's a continuation of the high activity and a growing activity as well, while Vietnam, Taiwan, in Southeast Asia is going to add to other Asian growth in the short to medium term, while Japan and South Korea is going to add to that towards 2025. For the US, we have seen delays, but from 2025, we'll also expect to see significant contributions from the US as well. Next slide, please. So if we go to Europe, the kind of the most mature region, we see a slower growth rate, but also from a larger installed base. However, we still see around 30 gigawatts, or almost 30 gigawatts of capacity added between today and 2025. So it's a very significant growth, and then most of it comes from the most established countries such as UK, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, but also new entrants such as France joining the party after kind of seeing the fruition of its tendering activity at the end of the last decade. And then towards 2025, we'll also see the added growth from other Europe, such as Poland, and especially Poland driving the other European growth. Next slide, please. So it's not just the activity that is kind of a leading indicator and a driver of the need for additional installation vessels. It's also the size of the different components. And here in this picture here, we're just putting a 12 megawatt turbine in context with its 260 meter height and a 220 meter rotor diameter. This puts another requirement to the vessel companies in terms of lifting capabilities and the different sizes of all of the different components, not just on the turbines, but also on the foundations, etc., that needs to go into these wind farms. Next slide, please. And that's what we've seen, a tremendous growth in the turbine sizes. So what we're looking at here on the y-axis is the turbine size, while on the x-axis the year of full commissioning. And the bubble size indicates the project sizes. So what we're seeing is that the projects are getting larger and larger, and the turbines are getting bigger and bigger. All the way on the top hand side, on the right, we see Sofia with its 114 megawatt turbines reaching 1.4 gigawatts. So it's a very, very clear trend in Europe that the turbine growth is really ramping up significantly. Next slide, please. But if we kind of overlay the Asian markets and then the Asian wind farms, this is highly driven by China, by the way, with a lot of standalone projects and a lot of a big growth in the short to medium term. But we see that the Chinese market is trying to build their own local value chain, and the local OEMs are still lagging their European counterparts in terms of turbine sizes. However, on the top-hand side, we see a couple of bubbles in 2025 for Hailong in Taiwan. We see Taiwan is really looking towards using the European developers, the European suppliers, and have opted for larger turbines on average. So they will drive up that average in the Asian region as well. So to the matter at hand, these are the two key drivers. So next slide, please. When we then look at what that means in terms of installation vessel demand, from a very kind of low market today, and also expected to be quite a low market today, what we're looking at here is the demand for wind turbine installation vessels in terms of vessel years. And just FYI, in this chart here, we're excluding demand from China, and intertidal being near shore, shallow water wind farms, typically in Vietnam, from this demand chart. So when we do that and we split it by the different turbine sizes, we do expect that the turbine sizes up to 13 megawatts can be handled by the kind of the general wind turbine installation vessels, the current fleet, so to speak, in the order book. But then the 13 plus needs to be handled by the next generation wind turbine installation vessels. And that portion is also expected to grow post 2025. So we see, an activity growing and the sizes growing. And when we compare the vessel years, reaching over 40 vessel years by 2025, comparing that to the turbine installation fleet, including the order backlog, we still see a need for additional vessels. And that's what is driving us to see, a bottleneck in this market. Next slide, please. And then looking at the foundation vessels at the same time, and also here excluding China and intertidal wind farms, we also see a bottleneck in the foundation installation vessel segment, reaching more than 25 vessel years, around 27, compared to a fleet that we have identified as 19 vessels, including the order backlog. We've split it here by 40-meter water depth, just to kind of approximate a range where monopiles can be installed and where there can be some flow over between the turbine installation vessel segment and the foundation installation segment. However, while both segments are in a kind of a tight situation, there will be need for additional units. Now, expecting to see an added activity towards 2030, this bottleneck is not going to solve itself. It will need additional units. Lastly, we see both from the pie charts that we've seen here on the fleet size, but also on the activity from new entrants that both the established players in these markets are adding new vessels to their backlogs, their order backlogs. And 2020 was kind of a shift in the pace of new orders for new builds. And we also see a lot of new companies, such as offshore heavy transport, Cadeler, etc., going really into these markets and trying to play an active role, as there's a lot of oil and gas weighted companies trying to transition towards the offshore wind industry. So definitely a large appetite for being part of a market where there is a very clear need for supply. Okay, I think that's what I had. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. If there are any questions for Alexander, please let us know in the chat, and I will forward them. Alexander, one question from my side. We are seeing quite a few companies now jumping into the gap. We've seen some very unexpected announcements as well. Do you think that the market can still ramp up fast enough to catch up with the shortage, or?
Yes, I think we still do, but the time is still kind of the essence here. There is still possibility to be able to place new build orders, to have them delivered by the 25 and onwards. So there's still definitely a possibility there, but it's really a time to move, and I think that's what we saw, kind of the early starters in last year, kind of seeing that and seeing the time criticality of that.
I have one question here from Yaka, and he would like to ask, do you have any thoughts on the offshore wind market after 2025?
Yes, we do, and we see a continued growth. We did look at kind of the levels that we saw towards 2025. That is expected to increase, and we think we will increase and see annual capacity additions of 20 gigawatts, 30 gigawatts towards 2030. And also, that will, on average, kind of result in more than 3,000 turbines per year towards the end of the decade. So it's definitely the arrows are pointing upwards, and that this demand is still going to continue post 2025 and even increase.
Okay, thank you, Alexander.